Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Athletic and Extracurricular Committee meeting for the Board of School Directors for the Wattsburg Area School District. At this time, I would like to call on the committee chair, Mr. Sean Matson, to call us to order.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to call this meeting for the Athletic and Extracurricular meeting to begin. Back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Matson. Just so everyone's aware, if there's anyone joining us this evening, we will have a presentation and then we will have a board discussion. And then should anyone have questions from the audience, I would ask that they submit them under the Q&A feature. So all questions from citizens will be under the Q&A feature for the committee meeting. And now I'll turn it over to Mr. Berlin.
Thanks, Dr. Bushak. Mr. Miller, can you walk us down through our athletic and activity safety plan?
Sure. Do you have it up there?
I don't. I should be able to. You want me to share that for you?
If they can see it better, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, give me 1 second here. Sorry, Becca normally does this. I'm not as quick.
You want me to get started a little bit?
Sure.
Okay. Basically what we have, our plan is just a general guideline, general plan to bring back sports to the Wattsburg School District, all levels of sports. Well, especially like 7 through 12. Steve, we can talk about the younger grades later. But we try to keep it pretty general. We're talking about, basically what we would do well, actually not in the fall, as soon as it's approved, what we would do with bringing the sports back. So depending on what phase we're in, we have it broken down into red phase, yellow phase, and green phase on the document. Some of the precautions that would take place, but really, pretty much in any phase that we're in, there's some general guidelines that we're going to stick to. For instance, before every practice or any type of team meeting, there's going to be a form that the coaches have to fill out where they will interview every participant and, find out if they've had any symptoms recently or been in close contact with anybody. And we'll also take their temperature. We're purchasing some of the non-contact thermometers. So we'll take everybody's temperature. And if it's above, I think it's 99.5, then, we'll take some other precautions. But this is by no means an exhaustive list of everything that could possibly happen. It's just basically looking at all the precautions that we would take, for when we do reopen sports. So depending, the red phase, we're basically still shut down if we go back into red. The yellow phase, which we're in right now, we would open up, but with a lot of precautions and safety measures in place. And the green phase really isn't much different than the yellow, because we still want to maintain all of the safety precautions that we can, while we're under any type of risk for COVID at all. So, basically it's just like looking at the guidelines that the state set forth and, taking all the CDC recommendations and all the recommendations from the PIAA and places like that, and just basically incorporating them into something that we can make work at the Wattsburg School District. So You know, you can read down through it. I don't know, Ken, you don't want me to read everything, do you? I can't, you're muted.
Yeah, I don't think you need to read it. I had sent them the earlier draft, I think on Friday.
Okay.
And I know you did make a few more edits, so just make.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, it's, you know, just general precautions that we're going to take, you know, as far as, you know, hand sanitizer, washing stuff, contact, you know, keeping people that we can keep apart, keep them apart. You know, and there's going to be some sports that are going to be much harder to do that with. And so those sports might have more restrictions if we're in yellow phase. You know, like cross country or something like that would have very few restrictions if we're in yellow, but football or wrestling, if we're in yellow, would have a lot more restrictions in place because they're a lot closer, you know, a lot more contact. And that's in there somewhere. I think it was, the classification of sports at high risk, medium risk, and low risk. So it talks about all that in there. Talks about, you know, the cleaning that would take place, you know, transportation, even things like sitting on the bench. You know, those are all things that, you know, we've taken into consideration. Now, you know, of course, there's going to be some more details, you know, as it's been a very fluid environment, as you all know, in the last, you know, few months. Things are constantly changing. So, you know, we think this is a good starting point, but by no means do we think it's our end point. You know, it'll be, we think it's, you know, going to be changing somewhat, but there's a lot of good precautions in there. Anybody have any questions on it or discussion?
Hi, Keith. This is Tara. I do have a couple questions.
Sure.
How are you? So for football, I know that they were planning on starting the, you know, summer training July timeframe. Is that still on track? And is it just going to be conditioning, or are they actually allowed to do practice? I know, you know, we're in yellow, and reading all of the documentation that Ken sent, it looks like it's just conditioning type of workout. So can you elaborate on what football is going to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's all I would recommend at this phase. I believe in the yellow, you know, they're not really, it's really non-contact conditioning kind of stuff. And we, you know, we really want them to be conditioning. The worst thing we can do from a athletic standpoint is to throw these kids on the field 2 weeks before the season starts. You know, oh, good, we're green all of a sudden, let's go and play. Well, you know, kids are going to get hurt that way. You know, a lot of sports injuries occur when kids are tired and they, you know, they just lose their concentration or whatever, especially a sport like football. So yeah, we want to make sure that they're working out as early as possible. And, but yeah, it'll be no contact, just mostly conditioning kind of things.
Okay. And then the next question I have is from a sports booster perspective. And this may be for Ken as well, and maybe Eric, I don't know if he's still on, but normally at this time of the year, we are preparing for the fall program. And I'm not so sure that, I don't know if maybe we'll be in green by then, but do we anticipate having enough, I guess, audience watching the games? And is the field really going to be done in time for us to have as many home games as we normally do? Because I think we're sitting at, I want to say we had 5 or 6 last year. So we're trying to figure out, do we advertise for the programs? And I don't want to strap the local businesses because of the environment that we're in. Everybody's strapped for money as it is. So we're talking about having different types of fundraisers instead of the program. So what are your thoughts on how many home games we'll really truly have in the fall, and spectators?
Well, I think, you know, spectators in that document, we talk about different levels of spectators, and, you know, parents and other spectators are tier 3, which is, you know, the least necessary. You know, there's 3 tiers in there. Tier 1 is the players and the coaches and event personnel, security, things like that. Tier 2 is actually the media, and Tier 3 would be any kind of spectators and parents and things like that. So, we could, if we're still in yellow, or if we're back into yellow or whatever, if we're in yellow, then, I think you still could see some type of spectator of Tier 3 spectator in the event. But it would be with a lot of precautions in place, as far as like social distancing and things like that. We do the best we can with that and limiting the number of people that are in the event. If we're in green, I think it'll be, we should be able to, we're still waiting, I think, for a little more guidance on that. I mean, right now it's 250 people. So I don't know if, I know there's more than 250 people in Lowe's when I was in Lowe's the other day. So I'm not sure exactly what they're going to be with that, but I'm guessing that if we're in yellow, there may be some spectators there, but it'll probably be limited, especially depending on the venue. If it's inside and it's a volleyball game in the gym, it's going to be a lot harder to get a lot of spectators in there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the guidance
okay.
that was released by the governor's office, they said that in green, you're limited to 250 people and 50% capacity of the venue. But it also went on to say that as conditions changed, and I'm paraphrasing, this will be reevaluated. So they kind of left the door open there that depending on how virus management goes, there may be opportunity for crowds.
All right, thanks. We have a booster meeting on Wednesday, so we're gonna reevaluate how we do fundraising for the sports, because we certainly don't want to not fundraise to, get money for all the sports, because we cover all of them. So we're gonna have to think outside the box on this one. Thanks for the info.
You're welcome.
I had two questions, Steve-O.
Yes, Mr. Stevo.
First question was, okay, so I see you use like the CDC guidelines to come up with these, and I looking at these, I was glad they weren't as restrictive as I was fearing. Will PIAA come up with guidelines that we also have to follow, or have they created things that we've consulted? I was just curious.
No, they are basically passing the buck. So,
Of course. Okay.
yes.
They did say that they were going to make us a template that would be available in another week or two.
Okay.
So, I mean, we can take a look at that. And the motion on the agenda is, to pass this and then delegate authority to the administration to further modify it as guidance from PDE and PIAA and the government becomes available.
Okay. One last question. The, with the state legislature, fighting the governor's orders and all that going down, they're going to have their little battle in court. If it comes out to say that the emergency declaration is gone, like none of those guidelines matter, like the levels don't matter. If that goes away, just curious, do we say we're still going to follow our thoughts here in terms of, we'll consider it a green since that's the best, most, there's not as much limit on that? Or do we say, well, there's no more emergency and therefore we're open for business? Just curious if that's been the thought.
I hadn't really gone that far down the road.
Okay. That's
I mean, if this, I do have this thought though. I mean, just because the politicians are trying to maneuver and make all these restrictions go away, that doesn't mean it's going to make the virus go away. The virus will still be here. So I think we should evaluate everything from that perspective.
makes sense.
I had a question.
Any other questions from the board, Mr. Blazer?
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you mentioned that, and it says, I think in the document, this is for PIAA sports, so 7th grade and up. So I thought I saw an earlier version that said that younger grades wouldn't be restricted until we were in a green phase. Does it say it in this document, or what recommendations are we making for below 7th grade?
I'm going to leave that to Mr. Carter.
All right. I have the guidance from the governor, pa.gov, and it talked about recreational sports, and it did say recreational sports would not start until we're in the green. So I'm just considering the non-PIAA, basically all the club sports at the younger grades, to be on hold until we are in the green.
So does the document, I was trying to look as Ken scrolled and look at my phone. Does it say that so here's my question. If we go green, which we're all hoping is sooner rather than later, does that open the door for those sports to follow our guidance for the green phase?
If it was up to me, I would say yes.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, if that's the guidance from the state, then if they're saying the younger grades and the clubs and stuff can start if we're in the green phase, then we would follow whatever recommendations are under the green phase.
Thank you. That's all.
Any other questions from the board regarding this safe return to athletics document?
I
Plan?
do have one question as well.
Mrs. Farrell?
Is there almost like disclaimer language that's being added to what athletes sign or approve when they're going into sports that does not hold the district accountable if they would contract this while playing sports? Or how do we have to be concerned about that? What does that aspect look like?
One of the documents in
I
it,
missed it, I apologize.
one of the attachments are, it's being scrolled down to, is the participation waiver. So I imagine it provides us some level of protection, but you're never fully protected. But just
At
it has
least
the parent.
I'm sorry, Keith, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, at least it provides what we call informed consent. But that if you ask any solicitor, they'll tell you that these waivers are good for informing people of what they can expect and what they're signing on to. But at the end of the day, anybody in America can sue anybody over anything. So that's just the way the system works.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
I have one more question, Mr. Pushek.
Mr. Blazer, yes.
So I read in the document what to do if one of your athletes becomes sick during an activity, an event, a practice. But let's just say, we start the season, we're in green phase, and one of the soccer players ends up becoming diagnosed. I know through contact tracing, all those families, those other youth that were active with him or her would be notified. So could that potentially shut down the season, or at least for multiple weeks for that particular team? Have we thought about, what happens when and if one of our students becomes ill, even if it doesn't happen during the event?
Well, it might not mean canceling the whole season. It might mean a temporary pause, but it'll hinge on the contact tracing. Vicki and I attended a meeting last week, and the infectious disease specialist from the UPMC was there. She's very, very smart, very up on the latest on this virus. And she said that contact tracing, if you can determine who's been exposed and for how long, because they're finding that surface transmission is not as prevalent as they once thought. And now they're saying, 6 feet, and I believe what'd she say, Vicki? 15 minutes? That 6 feet and 15 minutes would be considered exposure. So
she said within 6 feet for up to for 15 minutes or longer with no PPE would be considered exposed.
So that's why that contact tracing would be important, because you might only have to quarantine that team for a period of time to make sure no one else gets sick, or maybe only a few of the kids had that level of exposure.
Mrs. Bendig, could you ask the one question from the audience so far? I do believe we have an answer for that.
So the question from the audience, can someone address the health guidelines related to concessions and food service? Should the boosters be contacting the health department themselves?
Can someone correct me? I recall that the protocols were the same as, was it restaurants or outdoor dining? There was something in one of the documents that we received that said that that covered concession stands. Does anyone recall that? You're on mute, Mr. Berlin.
I'm sure we could find out. You know, I'm Vicky or we're happy to call the health department and get some clarification on that.
I recall a specific one of the documents that the board received regarding whether it was reopening school or whether it was something related to that specifically addressed concession stands would fall under a certain area. So maybe Mrs. Bendig, you could get back to the citizen that asked the question.
I know in our recommendations that we put forth for, for the re-socialization of sports, and under the yellow phase, there are no concessions. So that we'd have to be on the green phase to even consider any type of concessions at games or events.
Okay.
But there'd be no spectators at it if we're in the yellow, so.
Yeah, this is Tara. That's good to know because, we have to plan for ordering food and,
Sure.
Pepsi products and all that stuff. If you could, Ken and Vicky, if you could reach out, that would be great, just so we have a definite answer because I don't want to waste money.
Okay, why don't we shift topics? The other topic for our athletic and extracurricular committee meeting was the coaches evaluation process. And we had asked Mr. Carter to join us. We do only have about 7 minutes, so we'll go for about 5 minutes. And then if we have any further questions, we'll ask Mr. Carter to stay for the board meeting, and then we'll have any further discussion there. So let's use our time for the committee meeting for the coach evaluation process.
All right, I guess there is a form available. It really hasn't been used on a consistent basis. It's really been used in the past when a coach had issues and they were looking for a way to help get rid of them. They would use the evaluation, sit down with the coach and go over some of the things on the form. When I took over about 1.5 years ago, I started creating a new evaluation. I worked a little bit on it with Leslie. And then when she left and Mr. Podpora and Mr. Hudnall, things kind of got a little hectic and it kind of went to the back burner. I do have one done. I shared it with Mr. Berlin. I can share it. I believe I can share it on here. I've never done that before. And going forward, we'll have no problem using it on a consistent basis. It is pretty comprehensive, I think. So, and also this summer during the quarantine, Corey, they were looking to redo their coaches evaluation as well. So we got together and we found 10 different evaluations from school districts throughout District 10 and kind of picked and pulled and put things together and made it the way we like it. So I'm going to try and share that on my computer. Let's see if I can do that pretty easily. You guys see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So there's 4 areas that will be evaluated. Talks about how we'll go through the process. Just on a 1 through 4 scale. I know there were a little bit of talk of getting input from parents or players, and as the AD and a coach, I would be against that just because we kind of know how that would go. The kids that play a lot are going to give a good evaluation, and the ones that probably don't play much are not going to be giving good evaluations. And then if there were major issues that arose during the season, those generally do make it to the coach or the athletic director when it happens in the season. It wouldn't be something that would come up after the season.
Hey, Steve, this is Tara.
Yes.
Back to the parent and athlete feedback. Why are we against that? And the only reason I say that, and I'm coming at it as a coach and a parent and an athlete, all three constituents, don't you want to know from the kids and the parents how the coach is doing from their perspective? It doesn't mean that we need to act upon things, but don't you want that feedback to gauge how we're evaluating these coaches? Because, you know, we hear lots of things all over the place, and, you know, we hear things from boosters, we hear things from just being a parent. I think that data would be valuable, even though maybe sometimes we won't act upon it. I think it's still valuable data.
No, I kind of feel if it pertains to the coach, maybe the coach should do an end of season survey with the players and parents to get the individual input. Because I think it would open up a can of worms if administrators start getting feedback from parents and players. We don't really do it in any other areas. We don't ask the input from parents or students on our teachers or our principals or anything like that. So.
Andy, I had a question in that
Maybe we
same
should.
line. Sorry, Tara, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's fine. I was just saying maybe we should get feedback for our teachers and administrators, because that would also be valuable data.
Yeah, I'm just sharing my opinion on it. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts and opinions, but.
My question just was, for some of these, if there isn't any other input from, Mr. Carter, is this you do these evaluations then, or that's how this will be handled moving forward?
Correct. Yep.
And I guess my question would just be, for some of them, how do you know? Like, how do you know if they're providing adequate water breaks and rest breaks, or that parent complaints are handled appropriately? I mean, how is some of that being collected if there's not anything being gathered from outside?
That's a fair question. I'm not completely sure. Like I said, it hasn't been put into practice as of yet. Maybe for some of those, like the adequate water breaks, maybe I work together with the trainer and see what she, because I would never be able to be at all the practices.
Yeah, fair. Right.
Yeah. So.
And I guess as I look at this, I like a lot of the things that are on here, and that I understand that we don't always want everyone's opinions on everything, and that maybe it isn't information that's even all shared back to coaches. But even if there was some kind of a weighted scale, I mean, I agree with you that if it's an athlete that maybe doesn't play as much, maybe their perception isn't going to be as high of a coach. But maybe it's going to be just as high, if not higher, if they're doing something that's being respectful and growing that athlete. And so, I mean, I think there's a couple ways to look at that I was never a star volleyball player, and I would have always told you that my volleyball coaches were fantastic. And
we need to stop right there to get the regular board meeting called to order. If there is still discussion, we can either have discussion under the school report or under the athletic and extracurricular. So, or we could even have an additional time to talk during athletic and extracurricular time on the board meeting. So we need to leave this meeting. Mrs. Bendig, if you could invite Mr. Carter to the regular board meeting, and then I'll call that meeting to order. So thank you. This concludes the athletic and extracurricular committee meeting. On to the board meeting link. That's a separate link for the board members.